Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. I am moving right into the Warner Brothers lot, he said confidently. For decades, the chief executive officer had worked out of the Warner Brothers corporate office in New York City, effectively leaving the Hollywood business to the people in Hollywood. But fresh off striking a deal to borrow $30 billion of the $43 billion needed to acquire Warner Brothers from AT&T, the newly appointed CEO David Zaslav, a self-proclaimed film enthusiast, was keen to be squarely in the thick of it, saying, "I want to be where the content is made."
I think we're going to get on this train. We're going to take it for a ride.
In April 2022, just after closing the deal, he took over Jack Warner's historic office and found his old desk in storage. He promptly dragged it out of the cobwebs and back into the office he acquired and pulled out other memorabilia to decorate with. "I wanted them to remind me that we need to show as much courage now in leading this business as the Warner Brothers did in launching it 100 years ago." David Zaslav would need more than courage found in the antiquities of industry giants of the past when staring at the giant in front of him. The $56 billion mountain of debt he created to buy this company. Massive cuts to the company were coming to stop the bleeding and show investors that they could, in fact, pay back the money. But instead of preparing for the inevitable, Zaslav set up shop at the Beverly Hills Hotel and hosted actors, writers, producers, agents, and former studio heads, seeming to set their concerns of the merger at ease. And initially this worked. Several articles came out early on with glowing reviews, like Vanity Fair headlining an article, "All That Zazz." Producer Greg Berlanti told The Hollywood Reporter, "Everyone is excited about the fact that he has such a respect for the legacy of talent at Warner Brothers." But maybe they didn't see the historical gutting of Warner Brothers coming.
We have the greatest storytelling, the greatest content.
The media giant confirming that it's scrapping
36 titles from its online catalog.
We want everyone to see it.
That means no one will ever see what has now become a very expensive mistake.
A very significant business with HBO Max right now, with subscribers that love it.
By the time the bloodbath was over, countless Warner Brothers shows and movies had been canceled, and in the case of Batgirl and Scoob 2, films just outright abandoned near or at completion. Though the CFO Gunnar Weidenfeld said that the company's strategy of content cutting for tax purposes would now be over and promised that they wouldn't kill anything else in the future. This strategy worked once for Zaslav to help pay off a sliver of the mountain of debt he brought to the studio, and people moved on. But in November 2023, Zaslav's cost-cutting measures would strike again, this time at a film that was said to have had high testing scores and made it to the post-production stage again, just to save $30 million in taxes. We are talking, of course, about Coyote vs. Acme, a film that would set a fire that would begin to turn the industry against Warner Brothers. Join us as we unpack the abandoned Coyote vs. Acme and the implications it will have on the industry in our Abandoned Film series. What you're seeing here is the original TV show opening of Roadrunner featuring Wile E. Coyote and, of course, Roadrunner, characters from the Looney Tunes franchise. They first appeared in 1949 in a short called Fast and Furious, though I imagine it likely would not be called that today for reasons. These characters had always found their home at Warner Brothers, having been created by, at the time, animation director Chuck Jones, who also had a hand in creating most of the Looney Tunes characters. Jones sought to make a parody of cartoons like Tom and Jerry, and decided on a coyote as the main protagonist. The idea to use a coyote was based on Mark Twain's book, Roughing It, which describes a coyote as a long, slim, sick, and sorry-looking skeleton, a living, breathing allegory of want. He is always hungry. I doubt at the time Chuck Jones had the precognitive ability to see how much that quote and his coyote would embody the character of his employer over 70 years later. And I doubt at the time Chuck Jones would have predicted this segue about this video sponsor, Squarespace, or its new Fluid engine that allows you to click, drag, and drop elements anywhere you want to make building your website simpler than Wile E. Coyote falling off the cliff again. Maybe he could have found a new career by using all the crazy photos from his misadventures and selling them on Squarespace's beautifully designed gallery spaces. Or maybe he could have set up appointments for motivational speaking on never giving up. Well, if you want to be like him too, head to squarespace.com/FrameVoyager to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain using the code FrameVoyager. But just how did we get to these current events? Well, Coyote's attempts to catch Roadrunner pretty much always failed in cartoonish ways, with Acme's gadgets never really working as intended, usually backfiring on the wily Coyote instead. And so these events from the cartoon gave rise to Coyote vs. Acme, the concept of Wile actually suing the Acme Corporation over their laughably bad products. This idea first appeared in an article for The New Yorker written in 1990 by Ian Fraser, stylized as an actual legal complaint on behalf of Wile, detailing all of Acme's failed contraptions and their never-ending monopoly on Roadrunner catching gimmicks. Almost 30 years later, Warner Brothers did something super original and kicked around the idea of turning this short story into a film. So, in August 2018, they announced the development of the movie titled Coyote vs. Acme. They would hire director Chris McKay as a producer. Chris McKay is probably most known for his work on Robot Chicken and the Lego Batman movie, but also has a lot of experience as an animator and writer, and with the nature of his previous work, it did make a lot of sense to hire someone of his background to put together this style of film. They would also bring in the Silberman brothers to help write the script, who had previously worked on shows like Always Sunny in Philadelphia, Deadbeat, and Living Biblically. In December 2019, Dave Green signed on to direct, and Chris McKay would actually leave the producer role for the project in December 2020. No reason was actually given, but honestly, this is pretty common in these sorts of films. Though, high-profile figures would be brought on for the production, with James Gunn grabbing the producer role vacated by McKay, and John Cena, who starred in Gunn's Suicide Squad movie and Peacemaker TV show, being brought on as the Acme's sinister lawyer. They really did set themselves up pretty well from a talent standpoint, bringing in people from a very creative and comedic background to bring this absurdist IP to life, which makes this abandoned story feel much different than our video on Batgirl, as with that film, there were elements like the chosen creatives or directors that did seem a bit odd picks to direct, create, and produce that film. But for Coyote vs. Acme, from the very beginning of development, there's a pretty strong creative base with the right skill sets put into place, with even the replacements kind of being upgrades, and we will see that pay dividends later on in the story. By early 2022, the film was ready to be made, with principal photography taking place between April and May of 2022 in and around Albuquerque, New Mexico. Warner Brothers would set a release date set for July 21st, 2023. During that time, post-production would continue, with visual effects and animation being taken on by VFX studio DNEG. In April 2022, Warner Brothers would shift release dates to later on in 2023, giving its July 21st date to Barbie. Some see this as a strategic move, and some also see this as Warner Brothers brass f***ing with Christopher Nolan's film Oppenheimer, which was also being released on that same day, which is widely known as Nolan's primary week to release a film. Nolan's love-hate relationship with Warner Brothers is a story for another day, even though Barbeheimer kind of worked out for both of them. Continuing on though, by 2023, the Coyote vs. Acme film was reportedly completed and ready to go. In fact, it received some encouraging news at the time, scoring 14 points above the average for a family movie, and its final score reportedly was in the high 90s. Considering test scores rarely hit 90% in testing, this was a sign of a film that would likely do very well at the box office, and especially with families, making sense for a potential holiday season release timeframe since it had been moved out of its summer date. On July 11th, 2023, Warner Brothers would relaunch their feature animation division for the third time in its history, changing the name from Warner Animation Group to Warner Bros. Pictures Animation. Why the name change? You'd have to ask David Zaslav. But though this seems like a pretty innocuous event to even mention in this story, it would play a part later on. While 2023 was winding down, there had been little news on the status of Coyote vs. Acme, and that all came to a head on November 9th, 2023, when it was announced that though the film was finished, Warner Brothers would be abandoning it, so the studio could take a $30 million tax write-off of the $70 million production. This report immediately set off a chain reaction of rage within the creative community. Not only had they outright abandoned this film, but they did so again without telling the creators of the film before they told the press in public, just like the creators of the abandoned Batgirl film found out at one of their weddings. Director David Green put this out in a statement. For 3 years, I was lucky enough to make a movie about Wile E. Coyote, the most persistent, passionate, and resilient character of all time. I was surrounded by a brilliant team who poured their souls into this project for years. I am beyond proud of the final product and beyond devastated by Warner Brothers' decision. But in the spirit of Wile E. Coyote, resilience and persistence win the day. After receiving some praise and understanding in canceling Batgirl from the likes of James Gunn, who actually called David Zaslav brave, this time around, there were no excuses to hide behind. There were no quality issues to point to. There were no bad test screening scores to point to. And there were no past IP failures to point to, like in the DC universe. In fact, previously, even though Warner Brothers shot themselves in the foot with a dual Max and theaters release of Space Jam: A New Legacy, that film still acquired a $163 million take at the box office. So what exactly was their excuse this time? Warner Brothers would say this in a peculiar statement. With the relaunch of Warner Brothers Pictures Animation in June, the studio has shifted its global strategy to focus on theatrical releases. With this new direction, we have made the difficult decision not to move forward with Coyote vs. Acme. We have a tremendous respect for the filmmakers, cast, and crew, and are grateful for their contributions to the film. Obviously, not enough respect to let them know they canceled it before, telling the media, though what can you expect from a CEO that said writers are overpaid after the writer's strike earlier this year? While this is quite an absurd excuse from Warner Brothers, and likely not at all the reason it was canceled or abandoned, it really just comes down to being cheap and not taking the work of artists and storytellers seriously, only seeing it as a number on a massive ledger in the red created by David Zaslav. This decision seems even more foolish now, considering the massively underperforming movie Wish by Disney, especially since this movie was already completed and paid for with just marketing and distribution costs left. This also makes zero sense from a business perspective. You're ostracizing the one thing that makes your company money, the creatives and artists behind it all. And those very people decided to fight back. There was inevitable backlash from the creative community, with directors threatening to remove their projects from Warner Brothers and instructing reps to cancel meetings they had with Warner Brothers. Director Brian Duffield said, "I don't know how you see the movie and then go, that couldn't happen to me." Franz Salzenham, a lawyer at a boutique entertainment law firm in New York City, even believed there might be some legal issues with this, saying, "In addition to any regulatory violations that Warner's decision might trigger, there are also the contractual implications. Most states have the implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing built into all contractual relationships." This has also yet again gotten the attention of the US government, leading Representative Joaquin Castro from Texas to ask the FTC and the Justice Department to investigate Warner Brothers over this abandonment and tax write-off. He said that Warner Brothers was essentially burning down a building for the insurance money and saw the tactic as predatory and anti-competitive. Unlike with the Batgirl film, this time the protests against the cancellation of Coyote vs. Acme have had an impact, pushing Warner's to change course and allow other distributors to bid for the film. These distributors were streaming platforms like Amazon Prime and Netflix. So while the film won't get its planned theatrical release, it does still have the chance to see the light of day. However, I wouldn't get too enthusiastic just yet. Sometimes these acquisitions are hard to pull off, and it could leave the project in a state of paralysis for a long time. This is more than just a dollar tally. It's more than just a number, Zaslav told analysts in November 2022. "We are fundamentally rethinking and reimagining how this organization is structured, and we are empowering our business unit leadership to transform their organizations with an owner's mindset and a view on quality and accountability." Zaslav is now heading towards the end of 2023 with $43 billion in debt in Warner Brothers Discovery, and his bonus $200 million stock option package only kicks in if Warner's Discovery stocks hit $35.65 to $43.33 by 2027. Their stock is currently around $10. "I want to be where the content is made," Zaslav said. Unfortunately for him and his stock options, Warner Brothers doesn't seem to be in the business of making content anymore. At least, not any worth releasing, apparently. And you know who else decided to throw a completed project right into the trash? Stanley Kubrick, with a long-lost manuscript. Hear about that crazy story and his abandoned Napoleon film right here.